Hi, my name is Matthew Schmitz. I'm Deputy Editor at First Things, and I'm talking today with Irin Carmon of Salon.com. Is that right, Irin?
That's right. You got it. I'm impressed.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about Ross Douthat's column on fertility and decadence. And I was very fascinated, Irin, by something you wrote. It's something that I think you will hear said occasionally, but I'm not entirely clear on what it means. And it's the sort of slogan, "Feminism is the new natalism." Do you want to explain that for us?
Sure. Well, feminism is the new natalism is a quote from a British member of Parliament who was looking at different policies on the country level in Western Europe, looking at what might induce fertility. And recommended reading, by the way, I would say, is Michelle Goldberg's The Means of Reproduction. She has a great chapter on fertility in Europe, which I would recommend. That I think Ross has read it, but I would recommend rereading it. And one of the things that they noticed is that in countries that have really restrictive reproductive rights policies and very sexist cultures, there actually tends to be a lower fertility rate. Poland was an example of that. And, in countries like Italy and Portugal and Spain, they actually do have a very generous welfare state, but they also have very traditional gender relations. So, a woman giving birth might realize, or a woman contemplating giving birth might look down the line and realize that she has sort of more traditional service down the line, and if that's not something that she wants, it doesn't really encourage her to have children if she has any control whatsoever over it. So then they looked at countries like Sweden and France, which for various reasons in the 70s and just generally in the post-war era, obviously there were huge population losses in France. In Sweden, they noticed that they did not have enough workers, and they weren't really contemplating immigration. It's a very homogenous country. And so what they ended up doing to try to encourage the birth rate to go up was a series of social welfare policies, free daycare or subsidized daycare, I think in at least one of those countries they have direct payments for children. In Sweden, they have required paternity leave. At first, they had required parental leave, and they saw only the women were taking it. And so, this functioned in a couple of ways. Women wouldn't necessarily drop out of the workforce after having children, which was essential sort of to their overall workforce picture. And then also, the birth rate is some of the highest in Western Europe. Obviously, it's still lower than ours, but you could also sort of parse that number and look at the fact that they have better access to birth control and so on. So I think, when people think feminism and natalism, natalism is a little bit of a tarnished word. For some people, feminism is a little bit of a tarnished word. I think people look at the feminist emphasis in fighting for reproductive rights and specifically the right to access an abortion in a safe and legal fashion, and they think that that automatically means that feminism is against childbearing. Well, to my mind, the only thing feminism is against is coerced childbearing, obligatory childbearing. So I think then that also means the right to parent, not just the right not to parent. That's sort of a basic tenet of reproductive justice. So I guess when I was reading Ross's column and it says more babies, please, and when he says decadence, I think he's really talking about feminism, and he's really talking about female behavior. I just thought, well, I don't think our goals here are so different unless your goal is for people to have many more children than they want to have. Whereas I think in an ideal world, we would want to have a situation where people have as many children as they want, which in some cases we see that they're having fewer than they would like to. Sometimes they're having more. There's a mismatch there.
Right.
So that's
I think
feminism is in your natalism spiel.
Yeah, so I think I can agree with a lot of that, though by no means all. So Ross mentioned in his column how some of these social policies have succeeded in shoring up or bolstering birth rates, and what I think he was trying to get at with this decadence argument is the fact that there's something cultural too. There's something that we can't really get at, even with the most finely tuned government program. I think he was trying to sort of defend the sort of distinctiveness and freedom of cultures. I mean, if there's a different cultural ethos and people choose to have less children, it's going to be difficult to remedy that through, a series of nudges or of incentives. Now that I think that idea upset a lot of people, especially those you might call neoliberals. Matt Iglesias at Slate was very upset by Ross's decadence paragraph. He had this piece where he kind of praised like the good Ross and the bad Ross, and he said the good Ross is where he's talking about numbers. As long as we're crunching numbers, everything's fine. But if we try to enter into any kind of cultural analysis, suddenly we've gone awry. And
well, if you accept can you be more precise than decadence when it comes to a cultural argument? Like what? Because 800 words in a New York Times piece, obviously it has to be kind of boiled down. When you hear decadence, like what cultural analysis are you getting from that experience, from that word?
Right. I don't know. When I think of decadence, I think of kind of champagne baths and
That's what I'm doing tomorrow.
Right. Either people half clothed in silk and all that. I don't see a lot of that decadence in our culture. We have a kind of piece forthcoming in First Things, the journal I work for, written by Helen Riddlemeyer, a young writer, and she's talking about the sexual mores of people who attend Ivy League universities. She's a recent Yale graduate, and she says that there's not really hedonism on campus so much as there is a kind of sexual meritocracy where people try to overachieve and outachieve each other. They try to be, the best sex partners they can, but they aspire to really do it well. And it's not so much about enjoyment as it is about performance. And so I think that kind of analysis is true more broadly. I'm not sure that people are so much absorbed in kind of, providing for their own material comfort and preferring the present over the future and stagnation over innovation, as Ross says in his piece. I think they're more about, making sacrifices for different kinds of things. So, women are having fewer children. They've been regulating their rate of childbirth for years. But are women making fewer sacrifices? Surely they're just making more sacrifices, say, to the corporation than they once were to the family or to something else.
Right. I think what you're getting at here is that in some ways blaming it on decadence betrays a kind of fundamental lack of compassion, right? There aren't that many people who are deferring things because they love their huge apartment in the West Village, and they love all their vacations. That's a tiny subset of people that they're making their fertility decisions based on the fact that they like to go out all night. And I think I bet that there's just, I can say that there's much more sort of thickly layered situational problems that includes the cost of childbearing in a literal way, the opportunity cost of childbearing, on a career, in particular for a woman who bears the vast majority of the time she bears the burden. And then I think, I guess I'm no longer a recent Ivy League graduate. I graduated from Harvard 7 years ago, or 6.5 years ago to be precise. And I think, another thing that, I don't know if it's decadence or what, but there's also, lots of elite women don't want to have children by themselves. So you also, I actually, in most of the situations in my life that I'm observing, it's not really the women that are the problem in terms of, settling down, making life plans, privileging the future over the present. I think it's actually much more the younger men, who are really kind of,
yeah.
We're not who are the problem, but who are on a different schedule,
right.
and they don't have as strict of a biological schedule. Right. This is a tiny subset of the population, but again, I think it's a lack of compassion to blame it on decadence as opposed to the fact that there are structural issues, and then also again, and I think you mentioned this, we're no longer looking to breed in order to, supply workers for a farm. We no longer need to have such high fertility rates because the child mortality rate is dramatically lower. So I think people want to enter into parenthood, at least people who think intentionally about these choices and have the luxury to kind of plan things out. I think people want to enter parenthood in an intentional way. And that requires having both people on the same page and also saying, here are all the things that we are willing to sacrifice for this, but here are all the things that we're able to do for this.
Right.
You know, I don't think it's
I think you're
necessarily
right.
because they want to have like triple strollers in a fancy house.
Right. So I think you're right that there are kind of two separate problems here that can be disentangled, or two separate issues if they're not problems. And one is that there are probably a few people who are enjoying kind of more comfortable lifestyles, who are putting off childbearing because they have a different cultural orientation than, say, maybe their forebears did. I think even if you control for income, race, and other things, you'll see that people with higher rates of religious observance, say who attend services more frequently, will have higher rates of fertility than those that don't, which suggests there's a certain cultural orientation that differs between two types of people. Now, people who are religiously observant do tend to be, wealthier than those who aren't. If you're poor, you're not likely to make it to church as often as a guy who's rich, just because you have a more strained schedule and a more desperate life in general. Now, on the other hand, there are people who are just living kind of less comfortable and also more precarious lives, and say maybe than we might hope for. And what first caused Ross's column was the dip in fertility we've seen in the Great Recession here, where fertility has really dropped. And you can basically just chart it with the unemployment rate. And as unemployment rises, fertility drops because people aren't going to have kids if they can't support the ones they already have or can't support themselves.
Yeah, that's very plausible, which is why it's sort of, he started out by charting into the recession, and then he ended up by talking about decadence, which makes me think that he was just kind of trolling. But I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt your stream of thought.
The stream might be generous, trickle. So I was fascinated by a proposal I recently read from Ron Haskins, who's a scholar at the Brookings Institution who deals with kind of family structure and social welfare. And he suggested expanding the earned income tax credits to single persons. Usually, so the earned income tax credit is a kind of social welfare program that one receives only if you are receiving an income. So it's not a benefit you get if you're unemployed, but if you have a low-paying job, you can get this additional income credit on your kind of a refund on your taxes that will say bump up what would have been about an $8 an hour job, maybe up to $10 an hour. That would be its effect. And so this is usually something enjoyed or taken advantage of by people who have dependents, who have young children. And Haskins, this scholar at Brookings, thinks there really is a problem, the problem you identify, Irin, where often young women who are, say, maybe interested in childbearing can't find the right spouse. Maybe there's a boyfriend in their life, but he doesn't have a secure enough income, he doesn't earn enough. And so Haskins is hopeful that programs like this could push lower income men, people who have a harder time finding work. You could push them into employment, into where they're having a steady stream of income, where they can better support a family, better attract a mate. So I think proposals like that are promising. But there are other issues with these young men. If we look away from, say, the Harvard grads or Princeton grads who are living in the East Village or Williamsburg and aren't marrying because their life is great and it couldn't be improved on. A lot of these young people who aren't getting married, say, not only do they have low income, but they're sent to they're imprisoned on the basis of minor drug offenses, kind of weapons possession charges. And so there are a lot of laws that target young poor men disproportionately. And there might be ways to better enforce those so that more of these men can remain in the workforce. A lot of people think that these young men who are imprisoned on such charges are idle, but I think I read recently in a book by Stefanos Bibas, a criminal justice professor at the University of Pennsylvania, most of these young men are employed within a month of their imprisonment. Mm-hmm. So most of the young people who are being locked up, they do hold jobs. It's not a question of imprisoning the idle, but rather of removing people from the workforce.
Well, and also making it much harder for them to get jobs afterwards because if they have records.
Right.
I mean,
Right, so
but to go back to what you were saying about the earned income tax credit and the additional child tax credit, I would add. I mean, I think it sounds like an interesting thing to experiment with, and of course that those were conservative ideas that were meant to encourage people to be in the workforce, as opposed to having cash transfers or social programs with that money. But it's, I mean, I'm not sure how closely you identify with the Republican Party, but these are things that are currently being proposed to be slashed. I mean, Plan B, which obviously didn't pass, that John Boehner put on the table, slashed both of those tax credits. All of a sudden, this is when Mitt Romney talked about the 47%, he was talking about some of those families that don't pay any federal income tax don't because of the credits you're talking about. So, I mean, that sounds like an interesting thing that liberals and conservatives can collaborate on, but I see the movement of the party going in other directions. It doesn't really seem to be much of a priority beyond the rhetoric.
Right. Well, there are certain people in the party who would support it. Of course, Ross being a prominent example with his Sam's Club republicanism. Other journalists like Ramesh Ponnuru, Raihan Salon. But no, they're not the activists or donors who are making the decisions who kind of have control of the media, of the conservative media.
Or
so
the
47%, the 47% type rhetoric is very common in conservative circles. And I think that's a problem. I'm home here in Nebraska for kind of a little vacation from work, so I'm broadcasting from my childhood home, and I take as my political kind of paragon William Jennings Bryan, who was the great kind of champion of the common man, the sort of orator from Nebraska, and he spoke very eloquently when the income tax was first proposed against various conservative congressmen who thought that it would create a culture of dependency. And I tend to be skeptical of that rhetoric. Though I do find in the Republican Party a better home for my brand of politics today than I would in the Democratic Party.
For your what politics? What was that?
For my particular brand of politics. But it's not really an easy fit, to be sure.
Well, to what do you attribute the kind of falling away from from the Republican Party that pushed for those tax credits on the grounds that it was supposed to reduce dependency because you have to have an income?
Right. Well, I think people are looking at the budget crunch. They're looking at the deficit. People look at the euro crisis, and it's induced a lot of alarm. Now, I think that's a real problem. I mean, we are not Greece. We can print our own money, and so we're not going to have the same kind of monetary crisis that's afflicted Europe. And I don't think this is the time for hysteria. I think that if we're facing a fiscal cliff, the Fed has targets. They're targeting unemployment and they're targeting inflation. And even if we sail off the fiscal cliff, they'll print more money to help stabilize the economy. So I don't think there's a need to kind of slash things willy-nilly. I'm not sure that these apocalyptic scenarios are really correct.
Right, but I'm just saying that right now the party leadership is not championing these, intended to be pro-family measures. I guess the thing is that it feels like basically they have lost sight of policies that actually help children and families once they're born, and that the House of Representatives in the last Congress, they spent a year or 2 years passing measures to restrict abortion because those don't really cost anything. So they could sort of posture about being right to life, but actually kind of, reduce in any way possible any benefits to children once they're born or to their parents.
Well, measures to restrict abortion. Measures to restrict abortion famously do cost something. I think it was Bryce Covert wrote recently at The Nation about. She assembled some figures to show how restricting abortion actually increases, state outlays to social welfare programs. Yeah, Medicaid.
No, that's true.
They're born to low-income people, and she kind of challenged conservatives like me to say, doesn't this pose a problem for you? Do you oppose abortion, or do you want to slash the welfare state? And the answer for someone like me is easy. It's we oppose abortion, and even if there's a high cost to accommodating a kind of capacious and inclusive culture of life, I think that's fine. So, I remember
the same goes for family planning funding, right? I mean, they want to X out Title X and funding to Planned Parenthood in particular, but all of Title X. That money definitely, I think it's $1 to family planning saves you $4 in safety net.
Yeah, I find such calculations rather gruesome.
Look, that's why I think that these sorts of things need to be focused on female autonomy, right? I mean, I think this is not just about cost cutting. This is about getting women access to the care that they want, right?
Okay, so this is something I find more helpful, say, than the kind of Matt Iglesias neoliberal line I was talking about earlier, where they really do want to focus first on cost cutting. I mean, Iglesias is a committed feminist, kind of egalitarian. In a way, I'm not. But even so, for him, the numbers will always come first, and I can at least understand or admire someone who wants to kind of, put, say, a certain cultural value. You identified autonomy, put that first, and then to say, what's necessary to achieve that? What kinds of accommodations do we have to make to provide?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easier. It's easier for those of us who believe in a welfare state and reproductive autonomy. I think it's more consistent, frankly. Maybe it's also just like you guys have a little bit of a more. I know that there are people on the right who are social conservatives, and they're kind of along the way. They're kind of along for the ride on the fiscal conservatism, but it's not their preference. And if they thought that it were possible to, I definitely think that there are people who want to restrict abortion and then also would like to spend money on the safety net. They're just not in power.
Right.
They have no influence.
Yeah. I'll mention Nebraska again since I'm here. I'll give it as much press as I can, but in the last legislative session in Nebraska, the certain conservatives, kind of Tea Party types who've been elected to the state unicameral, wanted to cut prenatal care to mothers who were illegal immigrants, to pregnant women who were illegal immigrants. And obviously, as soon as those children, the so-called anchor babies, were born, they'd be American citizens. And the state would be legally required to offer them care. But these conservatives wanted to deny the prenatal care to the mothers. And so Nebraska Right to Life fought that very aggressively, and this pro-life advocacy group managed to defeat this sort of cost-cutting anti-immigrant measures. So yeah, there are certain fissures within the conservative coalition, but for the most part, I think people who are pro-life, they are fiscal conservatives, and vice versa. If you look at the kind of opinions held by conservatives, it's actually, it's a very sort of solid melding of the issues for almost all. Now, Irin, I wanted to ask you about, what you thought about something else. In my response to Ross's column, I highlighted comments by a writer named Noah Millman, who's at the American Conservative, though it should be said he's kind of a center-left writer. I'd call him, he's another neoliberal in the Iglesias mold. And what he zeroed in on was Ross's worries about our kind of reversing demographic pyramid. There are fewer working people to support the retired people at the top, the pensioners, the elderly. And so what he proposed, what he said was the most obvious solution was to take these old folks and send them overseas to retirement colonies, say in India or the Philippines, where they could be taken care of by cheaper labor. Now, this strikes me as crazy. This is insane. I mean, you can't take a part of a certain class of citizens, a part of society, and just ship it abroad. Even if say we don't always live near our grandparents, national borders are kind of lines of solidarity, and once you sort of send someone over that border, it's kind of a way of saying they've been kind of removed from the circle of at least immediate care or attention. I don't know. What do you think? Does that strike you as crazy, or is this? It's
completely crazy. I mean, I think that there was a wacky movie about it with Maggie Smith, and I think that's as far as that idea is going to go.
There was what with Maggie Smith?
A wacky movie about it. I saw the trailer of the movie where people go to India to retire because it's cheaper. And it had the guy from Slumdog Millionaire. So I think.
Well, actually, it's not as far as it goes. I just saw a news article today in The Guardian. The Germans have started doing this. They have something called senior palaces in Slovakia, where they have, I think right now there's 600, just a trickle so far, but 600 Germans living in Slovakia, a few thousand in Hungary.
You're talking about voluntary migration, right?
Well, it's tricky. In the article, what you see is that it's not all voluntary. There's this fellow who runs one of these senior palaces, and he says, "Well, many of our patients are here voluntarily." Is this quote in the article, which to say many are here voluntarily, I find a bit disturbing. I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with people who say are suffering from dementia, you can't always respect the kind of stated preference. Of the care recipient, right? Because people don't know their
who are alone in the world, or their families sign them off.
Right. So then, one thing the article highlighted that I thought was very helpful was that if you were suffering from dementia, from Alzheimer's, to be removed from your immediate surroundings is really disorienting because that's really all you're kind of capable of holding on to, since your grasp on the world otherwise is slipping. Anyway, it's just beginning to happen in Germany. It's not a big trend yet, but a few thousand German seniors have been kind of sent abroad, voluntarily or not, at this point. So, let's see.
Well, I think this intergenerational point is important because it gets back to the fertility question, right? These chasms between generations that develop when people have children later, right? And then also, you have basically the younger baby boomers and the Gen Xers are a sandwich generation now where they're taking care of kids and elderly parents, which is spreading this care situation very thin. So if anybody does end up basically shipping out the elderly population, it will be partly as a result of the fact that people are living longer and have fewer people to care for them, fewer resources to care for them. But that obviously shows the limit of a pure economic logic for this. I certainly do not support involuntary or semi-voluntary or ambiguously voluntary shipping of the elderly to poorer countries. But I think, it's hard because I think it's a little bit of a symptom. The fact that people can kind of make that theoretical leap so easily is a symptom of the fact that we have far more decentralized, destabilized families. I mean, it's like, is it decadence if people move across the country from their parents in order to get married? In order to take the best job, and then they get married there, and then they have kids there, and, they're each on other coasts. Is it decadence that you left Nebraska, or that my parents left Israel? And then we're growing up far away from where our roots are. I think overall we're so much more, that it obviously has an impact in terms of childcare and elder care, that we have these, incredibly scattered lives because people are making decisions based on things beyond staying by their family. They're making basically economic opportunity decisions.
Right.
Social capital decisions.
Yeah, I don't think it's decadent, but it does show a certain shifting in priorities, and we might lament a loss of certain things. There are these localists, a site called the Front Porch Republic, where many of them write, and I was speaking once to a writer for the site, Caleb Siegel, who I think is now the Attorney General of the state of Kansas, and he told me I should just move home to Nebraska from New York. That was his response when I said, well, I've left home, I've kind of gone off to the city here, what's the kind of loyal thing for a son to do? And he said, well, just move home. So that's one answer, but I don't think one that that appeals to many people. Now, Irin, you said
why doesn't it? No, but why doesn't it appeal to you?
Right. Well, there's nothing for me to do here, given the sort of the career I've adopted. To move home to Nebraska would mean to kind of a radical uprooting of the life I've built for myself, and also to be torn out of a network of friendships, relationships that I've built where I've made my new home. And I think most people do have that kind of innate conservatism. They don't relish the kind of uprooting of their lives, and so to propose a radical change like that isn't going to appeal. I mean, what would you say? Or do you think you?
Well, the radical change, I guess, was when you went to Princeton, right?
Right. But of course, going off to college is kind of the expected and logical thing for many people, if not all. Did you ever live in Israel, Irin?
I was born there and I left when I was 2.
Okay.
My brother and my sister both moved back.
Yeah. Well, I asked because I was curious if you had much familiarity with the kind of fertility and demographic situation there, because obviously that could be a point of particular anxiety. So many issues are brought into kind of special focus in Israel.
Well, I can tell you that they just changed the policy so that women who are 30 and older can freeze their eggs for free, or fully covered by their state insurance. The main question was whether this offered a kind of false promise, because it's not a guaranteed process. It's not a guaranteed. It's not guaranteed to work that when you defrost the eggs that you're going to get a fertilized embryo. But the IVF is subsidized. I mean, we have universal health care in Israel. We have sort of public-private partnership and an individual mandate. So healthcare is really not the problem. It's I don't know if it's decadence there. The religious birth rate is substantially higher than the secular birth rate when it comes to the Jewish population. The Muslim population, obviously, it's better known that birth rate is higher, but I believe it's getting lower and lower. It's slowing down. So I think, people talk about it as the demographic problem, which is pretty racist, I guess. But if you put aside the particularity of Israel feeling compelled to be a Jewish state, or being formed on this idea of being a Jewish state, again, a lot of these pronatal policies are really predicated on an existing social fabric that not only do we not have, we're moving in another direction. So I went with my mother. My mother had 4 children and raised 5. And I am very pro-family. I'm very pro-choice, and I'm very pro-family. For myself, I would love to have a big family like the one I grew up in.
I'm pro-life and anti-family. How about that?
Well, we're a team. We're well matched. But anyway, so my mother came with me to a panel. Jessica Valenti wrote a book called Why Have Kids? There was a panel of feminist writers, 3 of which had kids, 1 of which had chosen not to have one. And they were talking about the kind of, the cultural signifiers and the burdens and what's changed and what hasn't changed about having kids. And the thing is that, I think sometimes conservative writers, I'll hear them say things about how, our culture doesn't value childbearing, our culture values selfishness, Ross said the present versus the future. I don't think that's true at all. I think our culture, in a sort of cursory way that is, again, doesn't cost anything, doesn't require any change in the way we do things, but in a cultural, baby bump obsessed way, is telling women that their best role is still as mothers, but not offering any real support or resources when they actually have the children. So, and I don't just mean the government. I also mean, the workplace. And so I think, we hear over and over again, it's so great to have a family, it's so great to have a kid, especially now for elites, it's returned to the vogue. I live in Park Slope. I think I live in the perinatal capital of liberal America right now. They're having fewer children and they're having them late, but there's a real culture around childbearing, and that there's a lot of support there. I think the vast majority of America doesn't have that kind of flexibility in their work and the kind of support networks that are offered in those kinds of ideal situations. So anyway, my mother was listening to this panel of women in their 30s and 40s talking about raising kids and jobs and the cultural messages, and she raised her hand and she said, "Why do you guys put up with this crap? I can't believe how alone you are. You have nothing." When I had she had 2 children here, in the U.S. and 2 children in Israel. And she can compare everything from the availability of prenatal care all the way down to daycare. And, yes, Israel is a smaller country, but it's also a very diverse one like this country. And it has certainly made a commitment to making it easier on families than this country has. This country just throws you to the wolves. The only reason our birth rate is as high as it is, a lot of that is unintended pregnancy. I don't think we should be celebrating people having more children than they want.
Right. Well, I think there's always a difference. Say, if unintended pregnancy has a long kind of illustrious history in this country. I think if you look back at children conceived, say in the 60s, it's a huge number. I can't remember these figures, so I won't build much upon them. But very high proportion, maybe 40% or so of children were conceived out of wedlock, but born in wedlock, because there was kind of this culture of shotgun weddings, and so there are sort of unintended, and so there are unintended pregnancies, ones that say maybe begin outside a marriage but end in it, or ones that begin in a marriage, where that child will have a stable home, a sufficient provision for his needs, and then there are those say to the kind of single, unemployed, underemployed, and so those are two different things, and Americans.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, those are two different things, but I mean, I think the picture is a lot more complicated now because there's better access to birth control, although not good enough, and there's obviously access to abortion, which we didn't have legally in the 60s. But I mean, I would just keep in mind that 60% of women who have abortions already have a child, at least one. And then also, I wish I could remember off the top of my head right now what the percentage of women are married, but it is a large percentage. So again, I think this idea of, unintended pregnancies only happening to young single women, it doesn't happen. It's not necessarily the case, particularly when older women think they're not fertile anymore and then they accidentally get pregnant. That happens too. Right. So I think it's a complicated picture, but the fact remains we still have, our teen pregnancy rate is declining, but we still have, I believe, the highest teen pregnancy rate in the developed world. That also counts to us being the best, according to Ross. And also unintended pregnancies later on in life, which, whatever the outcome of that unintended pregnancy, great. My concern would be, does it map to what the woman's intention and desire is to access, whether it's carrying to term or not. I just don't think we should be celebrating a birth rate that can be, traced back to lack of access or implicit coercion by lack of access.
Right. It's hard to get away from implicit coercion under any system. Certainly when our elites are, talking about the virtues of nudging.
Talking about what?
The virtues of nudging, the idea of the sort of...
the virtues of nudging.
Sort of, the nudge, what is that, was it Posner or... I can't remember who wrote this book, Nudge, talking about how to form public policy to shape people's choices, a kind of soft coercion. I'm
not on board for that.
Right. So I think that I'm as someone who's pro-life, who wants to see every life protected from the moment of conception till the moment of natural death. I think that we do need to do a lot more to bolster the social safety net for those, the lowest rung of the economic ladder who really lack support. And even some of the more fanciful schemes like those in France for pelvic re-education for new mothers. Sure, I mean, if this is something that's useful, that kind of
we have so far to go before we get to pelvic re-education.
Yeah, we do.
How about increasing Head Start?
Right. So, but I think that one thing that's important to say, even if one has a kind of resistance to the idea of redistribution, one thing that, say, conservative advocates like Ross for an expanded child tax credit have pointed out is that people who, put their time, money, energy into raising children are making a sacrifice that is kind of broadly socially valuable, and it's reasonable and just, and it doesn't smack of nefarious redistribution to kind of structure the safety way in such a manner that their contributions are properly compensated.
Well, Matthew, I think you should be debating a conservative who opposes those tax credits, because I'm with you. I mean, you have your own people to convince, right? You have to get the votes on your side.
Yeah, I'm not sure why anyone would want to listen to me, but
but you know what I mean. I mean, I think. Look, people talk about where could there possibly. I mean, where could there possibly be common ground? This could be common ground. but it's being
Right.
torn apart. I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about birth control?
Well, I'm a Catholic, so I oppose it. You know, I don't. You know, it's not my place to really to tell people what they ought to be doing. I don't go out of my way to inform strangers or even acquaintances of my moral views.
Well, how do you
but-
feel about Title X? How do you feel about publicly funded birth control?
Well, I don't think that. So I firmly oppose the HHS mandate, where people are required to say private, to kind of personally directly fund birth control. I don't think that consciences ought to be coerced in that way. Though obviously there's always going to be a balance between kind of conscience and sort of public goals. And I do think that a kind of broadly healthy culture will be one where birth control is relegated to the margins, where it's not kind of celebrated publicly, where it's not a kind of essential kind of tool of one's lifestyle, where one's kind of entrance, say, into manhood or womanhood is structured around the use of birth control. I'm not.
I think
I'm
we're
not
getting
a
into
fan-
decadence here.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of birth control, if you can't tell. But that said, I firmly expect that birth control will be available in our society, and I think it's very reasonable in any human society where, of course, people don't always behave in accordance with the teachings of the Catholic Church or any other church. I think it's reasonable that birth control be available in some forms. Though I lament and do not celebrate that.
Right. Well, I mean, but the HHS mandate aside, we do have government-funded birth control for low-income people, right? I mean, that's the funding to Planned Parenthood. That's subsidized birth control and STD screening and so on through Medicaid.
Right.
And it's a program signed into law by Richard Nixon.
Right. Well, I think Planned Parenthood's contributions to women's health are sometimes overstated, though. The part of that comes down to a kind of metaphysical thing. I don't think abortion is a medical procedure. I don't think it conduces to health. I don't think the taking of life contributes to life. And of course, I call that a life, and I'm sure you don't, Irin.
I mean, I think it's alive. I just think that it's, I just think that there's a
Right.
sliding scale of autonomy.
Sure.
I would never deny that the fetus is alive.
Right.
Lots of things are alive.
Right. No, that makes perfect sense.
But to go back to birth control being celebrated in our culture, I mean, I think that we actually now, however many minutes, 42 minutes in, we have hit upon decadence, right? So I think maybe it's time for me to stage a partial defense of decadence, which is to say, I mean, I think that what you're saying when you talk about you don't think birth control should be celebrated, even if you don't want to impose your own framing on it on other people, it sounds to me like you're saying that, if I can read between the lines, that it's a sort of cheapening or a corrosion to have non-procreative sex be a kind of rite of passage in our society. Is that right? Am I restating that somewhat correctly?
Yeah. Well, I don't think that. I don't want to adopt kind of the R. Kelly view of sex. Sometimes in his songs, he likes to sing about let's make a baby. It's kind of an especially emphatic form of copulation for him. The best sex will lead to childbearing for R. Kelly, and I don't want to say that. I mean, it's fine if sex is enjoyable and it doesn't result in say the conception of a child. That doesn't I'm not opposed to a culture of kind of enjoyment just for its own sake. I don't think that's decadent. I think that's simply human, and that's a good thing. I guess what I'd say is that I view contraception as a kind of thwarting of a process that ought to be open to life, even if it doesn't always result in life. And so that's why I oppose it. It's kind of a difficult distinction to see. A lot of Christians disagree with me about contraception. I oppose it. A lot of Christians favor it, including conservative Christians. Most evangelicals favor contraception. Mm-hmm. But the Christian moral witness up until the 1920s was consistently against it. And that's something I'm interested in upholding.
Well, I mean, here's where my partial defense of decadence comes in. I do think part of it is just sort of empirical public health policy, right? I mean, people are having sex without the intention to have children. People, aren't ready. Their lives change. All of these different things. Let's say that even if you oppose contraception entirely, I imagine you prefer its existence to, an 100% usage of abortion as a birth control method, right? I mean, I assume that given hierarchy of things that you don't like abortion more.
I prefer less bad things to more bad things.
Right. Okay, yeah. So just to kind of lay that down. But I also think that decadence is a cruel word for, things like a pursuit of self-knowledge, an understanding of other people, an exploration of the world. And I happen to believe that pleasure and that sex, if so chosen, if so undertaken, with full consent and full knowledge, can be part of that. I don't think that every sexual experience has to be open to the possibility of life, particularly when the costs of bearing that life are so unevenly distributed. So I think birth control and abortion should be celebrated as women's health and women's rights, partly because they allow women to fully participate in every aspect of life, including sex, in a way that does not involve a tremendous physical and social and life sacrifice. And, we do all sorts of things that are not natural,
I think you're right. I think so. Well, so first on your kind of narrow point that we need to have the burden shared more equally. I think that's right and reasonable. And if we're to build a culture of life where, say, we can outlaw abortion, where we can see use of contraceptives decrease for it to become more irregular. That's going to have to be.
Why do we? I mean, in order for people to, one thing has to happen if we want contraception to be less regular. People are going to have more babies, or they're going to have less sex, or maybe they're going to have more abortions. I just don't see convincing them having to have less or going to have less sex than they are right now.
Right. Well,
I mean that just in the realm of the practical.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that often it's too easy to overstress the impact of the pill. Fertility was declining for centuries before its introduction, and humans are very resourceful in finding ways to regulate their fertility through abstinence, as you mentioned, or through contraception. And I'm not necessarily interested in seeing people have lots of children. I don't think that's in itself necessarily a cultural value, though. We're probably having too few right now. I guess what I would say, I really want to get back to the point you kind of said. You're sort of a partisan of pleasure, right? Is that fair? Say,
sure.
It's okay. It's good to.
Yep, I'm into it.
Good, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm enjoy something.
Yeah, no, but also autonomy and participation and pleasure is part of life. Mm-hmm. It's part of liberation.
So I think. Maybe that would be more decadent if we had more partisans of just sort of autonomy and pleasure, and say against certain kind of traditional sacrifices. But I guess this is where I might differ. Well, I wouldn't say I really disagree with Ross, but this is where I would have developed his column in a different direction had I gone on. And I would say my point would be that this really, I don't think our culture is actually that decadent. I don't think that people are enjoying kind of pleasure or sort of this kind of comfortable estate where they sort of do nothing and just have their kind of autonomous amusements. I think as you pointed out, many of the people who aren't having children are in very difficult financial circumstances. They don't have adequate support. They can't find a suitable mate anywhere in their local community. So I think that I would prefer a kind of more decadent pleasure-based society.
Right, if that's actually the case, yeah.
To the one that we have otherwise. I mean, that would be more human, at least.
Well, on that note, we wish we had a more decadent culture than we did, and we have a culture of struggle.
Together, we can work toward that.
Yes, let's do it. Thank you so much. It's been great talking to you.
Yes, thank you, Irin, and have a merry War on Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well. Bye-bye.